As of today, the United States and Iran are engaged in their most dangerous diplomatic standoff since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. American military assets, unprecedented in their scale since the 2003 Iraq War, have been deployed around the Persian Gulf. Iran is under severe internal economic and social pressure following nationwide protests and a devastating 12-day war in June 2025, in which the U.S. and Israel struck 3 of its major nuclear sites. Yet despite all indicators pointing toward imminent conflict, the United States has held back, and the reasons are far more complex than they appear. Meanwhile, Russia and China have not stood idle. On February 17, 2026, Russia, China, and Iran conducted joint naval exercises, dubbed Maritime Security Belt 2026, directly in the Strait of Hormuz. Chinese spy ships are actively tracking U.S. carrier movements in the Arabian Sea, and a trilateral strategic charter was signed between the 3 nations in January 2026. Every step of what experts call war posturing is being taken, but no shots have been fired yet. Welcome, you are watching a special edition of our news channel, and today we are going to take you deep into one of the most consequential geopolitical chess games of the 21st century. The question before us today is deceptively simple, but enormously complex in its answer. Why is America, with the most powerful military in human history, not attacking Iran? And the second, equally vital question: is Russia and China following every single step of a war playbook to either prevent that attack or exploit it for their own strategic advantage? Let us begin at the beginning, because to understand where we are today on February 26, 2026, you need to know everything that happened over the past 14 months. You need the timeline, you need the numbers, you need the facts, and you need to understand the chess moves being made by 4 major powers: the United States, Iran, Russia, and China, all on the same dangerous board. Let us go back to June 13th, 2025. That was the date Israel launched a massive military offensive against Iran. It was not a surgical strike. It was a full 12-day war. Israel hit nuclear facilities. It struck military installations. It eliminated several of Iran's top military commanders and damaged key infrastructure. The world held its breath. And then, on June 22nd, 2025, something extraordinary happened. The United States of America directly joined the war. President Donald Trump authorized Operation Midnight Hammer. 4,000 American military personnel were involved. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flew into Iranian airspace and dropped 12 massive ordnance penetrator bunker buster bombs, the most powerful conventional bombs in the American arsenal, on the underground enrichment facility at Fordow, buried deep inside a mountain. Natanz was struck. Isfahan was struck. In a single night, America bombed the heart of Iran's nuclear program. The very next day, on June 23, 2025, Iran fired missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the facility that hosts thousands of American troops. Fortunately, the strike was telegraphed. Aircraft had been pre-evacuated. There were no American casualties. Analysts widely described it as a deliberate face-saving move. Iran wanted to hit back, but it did not want to provoke a full-scale American response. On June 24, 2025, President Trump announced a ceasefire. The 12-day war was over. Or so it seemed. Because what happened next tells you everything about why we are in the crisis we face today. Iran did not surrender. Iran did not capitulate. Iran began rebuilding. Satellite imagery from commercial providers like Landsat and Sentinel-2 showed that as early as late 2025, Iran was accelerating work at what researchers called the Pickaxe Mountain facility, a site south of Natanz believed to contain centrifuge equipment buried at extraordinary depths. Iran was sealing tunnel openings at nuclear complexes in Isfahan. It was reestablishing supply chains from China to replenish the solid-state rocket fuel needed for its ballistic missiles. According to analysis published by the Alma Research and Education Center in Israel, on February 11, 2026, 19 of Iran's 25 major ballistic missile launch bases had been directly attacked during the 12-day war. Yet satellite data showed that the underground components at nearly all of these bases likely survived the bombing almost entirely intact. Here is the critical fact that every viewer needs to understand. Iran had approximately 2,500 ballistic missiles before the June 2025 war. Israeli and American strikes destroyed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the country's active missile launchers above ground, and collapsed roughly 95 tunnel shaft openings. But the missiles themselves, the actual warheads and rocket bodies stored deep underground, likely survived in significant numbers. Iran was not disarmed. It was damaged. And a damaged but determined adversary is in some ways more dangerous than an untouched one. So when President Trump returned to the White House following the war and began threatening renewed military action, he was doing so against a country that had already fought him once, survived, and was now quietly rebuilding its arsenal with Chinese assistance. Now let us talk about diplomacy, because the military story cannot be told without the diplomatic backdrop. On April 12, 2025, more than 2 months before the war, the United States and Iran had actually sat down for direct nuclear talks in Oman. It was a historic moment. Trump had sent a letter directly to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Indirect talks were held through Omani mediators. There were 5 rounds of negotiations: Muscat, Rome, and back to Muscat. At one point in late May 2025, Oman said the talks had made some but not conclusive progress. But then things fell apart. Iran signaled it would not accept America's core demand, the complete dismantlement of its uranium enrichment program. Trump set a 60-day deadline. That deadline expired in mid-June 2025. Israel attacked within days of the deadline passing. Then America joined. After the war, negotiations resumed, haltingly, with enormous difficulty. The September 2025 snapback of United Nations sanctions, triggered by France, Germany, and the United Kingdom under the mechanism of the 2015 nuclear deal, added another layer of economic pressure on Tehran. By early 2026, Iran's economy was in freefall. Inflation had become crippling. The Iranian rial had collapsed. And starting on December 28, 2025, nationwide anti-government protests erupted in all 31 of Iran's provinces. Hundreds were killed in the crackdown. Thousands were detained. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps deployed across cities. Reports of mass arrests and summary executions filled international newswires. The European Union declared the Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization on January 29, 2026. It was in this context, in Iran facing economic collapse, international isolation, and internal rebellion, that Trump decided to turn up the military pressure once more. In late January 2026, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was deployed to the Arabian Sea. Then came the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, sailing into the Mediterranean and heading toward the region. More than a dozen F-22 Raptors from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia were dispatched to the Gulf. F-16s arrived from bases in Germany, Italy, and South Carolina. Reports emerged that F-35s from the United Kingdom were being repositioned to Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. THAAD missile defense batteries were erected. A dozen U.S. Navy warships were active in the region simultaneously. Trump declared on Truth Social on January 28, 2026, that a massive armada is heading to Iran, moving, he said, with great power, enthusiasm, and purpose. And he warned that if Iran did not agree to a deal, the next attack will be far worse. So why, with all of this firepower assembled, has America not struck? This is where the analysis becomes truly fascinating and where we uncover the real reasons behind America's hesitation. The first reason is what military analysts call munitions depletion. The June 2025 war was not free. Far from it. During the 12-day campaign, the United States expended enormous quantities of its most sophisticated and expensive air defense interceptors. The THAAD systems, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, were heavily utilized. SM-3 interceptors launched from Navy destroyers were expended in significant numbers. The MIM-401 Talon interceptors were used. These are not stockpile items that America replenishes overnight. According to analysis published by the Council on Foreign Relations, these inventories will not be fully restocked until approximately 2027. And here is why that matters enormously in the strategic picture. 2027 is exactly the time frame that defense planners refer to as the Davidson window, named after former Indo-Pacific commander Admiral Philip Davidson, during which the risk of a Chinese military move on Taiwan is assessed as highest. American war planners do not want to be simultaneously running out of air defense interceptors in a confrontation with Iran while China is threatening Taiwan. The math does not work. The second reason is the cost lesson of Yemen. In March through May 2025, the Trump administration launched an intense bombing campaign against the Houthi rebels in Yemen, the last remaining active members of Iran's self-described axis of resistance, capable of daily attacks. The result? In the first month alone, the United States spent roughly $1 billion on operations. It expended 2,000 bombs and missiles. It lost 7 drones shot down and had 2 FA-18 Super Hornets involved in accidents off aircraft carriers. And in the end, the Houthis agreed only not to target American shipping. They made no such commitment regarding Israeli shipping, and attacks on Israel continued until the end of the Gaza war. Yemen was expensive, incomplete, and ultimately inconclusive. Iran would be Yemen multiplied by 50. The third reason is Iran's missile strategy. Analysts at Al Jazeera's Center for Studies published a detailed assessment explaining that Iran's entire military doctrine is built not on winning a conventional confrontation, but on exhausting America's missile defense systems. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, cruise missile inventory, and strike drone capabilities are designed to overwhelm American defenses through sheer volume and sustained tempo. Even if 90% of missiles are intercepted, and that is a high success rate, the 10% that get through can close airspace, damage infrastructure, kill soldiers, and most importantly, generate political pressure back home in the United States. America's goal in any Iran strike would be to destroy Iran's nuclear and missile programs. Iran's goal would simply be to survive long enough to make the conflict politically unsustainable for Washington. Historical precedent, from Vietnam's resistance to Rolling Thunder to Iraq's survival of sustained Gulf War bombardment, suggests Iran's strategy has merit. The fourth reason is the lack of Allied support. Unlike the 1991 Gulf War, which assembled a coalition of 35 nations, any renewed American military campaign against Iran would almost certainly proceed with only Israel as a partner. European allies are explicitly opposed. The Arab states of the Gulf are terrified of Iranian retaliation and want diplomacy. NATO partners are focused on Ukraine. America would be largely alone. And alone wars in the Middle East have a poor track record. The fifth reason, and perhaps the most underappreciated, is the transformation of Iran itself. Analysts at Responsible Statecraft published a striking assessment in late February 2026, arguing that the June 2025 war actually liberated Iran from its own fear of total war. For years, Tehran's strategic posture was governed by a paralyzing caution, a belief that war must be avoided at any cost, even if it meant absorbing repeated Israeli provocations without full retaliation. That posture ended on June 22, 2025, when American B-2 bombers struck Fordow. Iran now knows it is in a cycle of recurring limited wars. That knowledge, paradoxically, makes Iran's leadership more willing to absorb punishment and less susceptible to coercion. A country that has already been struck at its most sensitive facilities and survived has far less to lose from the next confrontation than one that has never been hit. And this is the central dilemma Trump faces right now. He cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program through airstrikes alone, without committing to something that looks much more like a prolonged regional war, one with no clear exit strategy, enormous financial cost, significant risk of American casualties, and global economic consequences, including an oil price shock that would hit American consumers directly. Now let us turn to the second major question of this video. Is Russia and China following every step of the war? And what exactly does that mean? The answer is yes, but the picture is more complicated and more strategically sophisticated than a simple alliance narrative would suggest. Let us start with what Russia and China are actually doing. On February 17, 2026, Russia, China, and Iran deployed naval vessels to the Strait of Hormuz for joint exercises under the name Maritime Security Belt 2026. This was not a surprise exercise. It is a recurring annual format, first held in 2019. But the timing, in February 2026, with American carrier strike groups assembling around Iran, gave the exercise enormous symbolic and political weight. Russian presidential aide Nikolai Patrushev said explicitly in an interview with the publication Argumenty и Fakti that the exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, given current events, proved to be relevant. Russian Captain First Rank Alexei Sergeyev, commanding the Russian naval group, declared that the three-country cooperation shows we can manage and resolve many maritime and coastal issues together. Russia's broader support for Iran is significant, but must be understood within limits. In December 2025, Russia and Iran concluded a deal worth $589 million to rebuild Iran's air defense systems, nearly all of which were destroyed during the 12-day war. According to leaked documents from the Russian arms manufacturer Rostec, Russia has agreed to supply Iran with 48 Su-35 Generation 4++ advanced fighter jets, which would dramatically improve Iran's aerial capability starting in 2026 and beyond. And the two countries signed a comprehensive 20-year Iranian-Russian Treaty on Strategic Partnership in January 2025, covering defense cooperation, likely including arms sales and intelligence sharing. But, and this is crucial, Russia has no mutual defense treaty with Iran. Russia is legally and militarily under no obligation to defend Iran if America or Israel attacks. Russia is deeply occupied with the war in Ukraine. Its military-industrial capacity is stretched. And perhaps most revealingly, Russia received enormous benefit from Iran over the past 2 years. Iran established an industrial production line for Shahed 136 suicide drones in the Russian city of Alabuga, producing 10,000 units per year at a cost of around $193,000 per unit. Russia launched over 38,000 of these drones against Ukraine. Russia's debt to Iran, in military terms, is enormous. But that debt is not being repaid in kind with military protection. Russia has provided intelligence, Russia has sold weapons, but Russia has not offered to intercept American missiles heading toward Tehran. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy published a pointed analysis titled Iran's Failing Eastward Pivot, noting that despite Iran's enormous contributions to Russia, Moscow's interest in reciprocating is not reciprocal in practice. Iran's Russian-made air defense systems, notably, failed to engage a single target successfully during the 12-day June 2025 war. Russia knows America and Israel know how to defeat Russian air defense technology, and that knowledge limits how much Russian air defense hardware can actually protect Iran. China's relationship with Iran is in some ways deeper and in some ways even more constrained. China is Iran's economic lifeline. Beijing purchases approximately 90% of Iran's total oil exports, approximately 1.38 million barrels per day in 2025, providing the regime with billions of dollars annually, despite American sanctions. To circumvent the swift international banking system, China and Iran have constructed what researchers describe as a dark barter and credit system. China has signed a 25-year strategic cooperation agreement with Iran worth an estimated $400 billion, covering trade, infrastructure, and security. In terms of active military support in the current 2026 crisis, China's actions are notable. In late January 2026, coinciding with the American military buildup, 16 Chinese People's Liberation Army cargo planes conducted a rapid airlift to Iran, reportedly delivering technical and military assistance. Chinese spy ships have been deployed to shadow American carrier groups in the Arabian Sea, collecting intelligence on U.S. missile defense positioning and naval formations. Commercial satellite imagery from China revealed the deployment of U.S. THAAD batteries in Jordan, intelligence that has almost certainly been shared with Tehran. China and Iran are reportedly finalizing a deal for the CM-302 supersonic anti-ship cruise missile, which would give Iran a significant new capability against American surface vessels. And China's military attaché in Tehran presented the commander of the Iranian Air Force with a scale model of the J-20 stealth fighter, a symbolic gesture interpreted by experts as a warning to Washington and Jerusalem that China could arm Iran with next-generation aircraft if conflict erupts. At the United Nations Security Council, China's permanent representative has repeatedly and firmly opposed any military action against Iran, warning that military adventurism in the Middle East would plunge the region into chaos. China has stated at the highest diplomatic levels that it considers any U.S. military strike on Iran a violation of the UN Charter. But here, too, the limits are visible. During last June's 12-day war, China remained on the sidelines. It offered only verbal condemnation of the strikes. It did not send weapons. It did not send troops. It did not activate any defense mechanism. The UK Parliament Library's February 2026 briefing on Iran explicitly noted that analysts do not expect either Russia or China to provide significant defense or security support to Iran, echoing their responses to the June 2025 U.S.-Israel military strikes. The reason is cold strategic calculation. Xi Jinping is scheduled to host President Trump in Beijing in April 2026. China wants a grand bargain with America over Taiwan and the broader Indo-Pacific order. It does not want to be seen as a co-belligerent in a Middle East war that could sabotage that larger game. Some analysts, writing in The Hill, have gone so far as to argue that Russia and China are quietly nudging Iran toward accommodation, noting that Iran was reportedly persuaded by its great power partners to withdraw from a recent BRICS naval exercise. The message, the analysis suggests, is that Moscow and Beijing want Iran to remain stable and functional as a useful partner, but they are not willing to sacrifice their own strategic interests to save the regime if America decides to strike again. This creates the extraordinary dynamic we see today. On February 26, 2026, diplomatic talks are underway in Geneva as we speak. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has led his delegation to Switzerland, where a third round of U.S.-Iran discussions is taking place, facilitated by Omani mediators, with direct involvement by the International Atomic Energy Agency. On Tuesday, February 24, Trump delivered his State of the Union address and struck a explicitly dual-track tone. He expressed a preference for diplomacy, while simultaneously laying out his case for military action, accusing Iran of rebuilding its nuclear program, developing missiles capable of reaching the American mainland, and being responsible for the deaths of U.S. service members through roadside bombings and proxy forces. Iran hit back hard. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said he saw a, quote, positive outlook to the Geneva talks. Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf issued a stark warning. If you choose the path of diplomacy, one in which Iranian dignity and mutual interests are respected, we will remain at the negotiating table. But if your decision is to repeat what happened before, through deception, lies, and misinformation, and to bomb the negotiating table while Iran is pursuing diplomacy, then you will once again taste the strong blow of the Iranian nation. Foreign Minister Araghchi posted on X that a deal with Washington to avert conflict was, quote, within reach, saying his delegation was heading to Geneva with, quote, a determination to achieve a fair and equitable deal in the shortest possible time. He also declared Iran's position clearly. Iran will under no circumstances ever develop a nuclear weapon. Neither will we ever forego our right to harness the dividends of peaceful nuclear technology for our people. The International Crisis Group, writing in an analysis published just 2 days ago on February 24, 2026, noted that this third round of talks, scheduled for today, February 26th, could be potentially decisive. The organization argues that both sides could still advance their interests through a bargain in which Iran pledges to continue its current freeze on uranium enrichment, while details of a longer-term arrangement are finalized, in return for a degree of sanctions relief. Such a deal could also address non-nuclear concerns, including limits on the range of Iranian ballistic missiles and their transfer to proxy groups, alongside a mutual non-aggression understanding. But the window is extraordinarily narrow. Trump gave Iran a 10 to 15-day ultimatum from approximately February 20, meaning the clock is ticking toward early March 2026. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of Washington's most hawkish voices on Iran, told media that American strikes could be, quote, weeks away. Two anonymous U.S. officials told Reuters that American military planning on Iran has reached, quote, an advanced stage, with options including targeting Iranian individuals and pursuing leadership change in Tehran. CBS News reported that strikes could have come as early as this past Saturday. The fact that no strikes occurred by the time this video was published is itself significant. It suggests the Geneva talks are being given a chance, at least for now. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has reportedly been raising concerns internally about the risks of a new Iran strike. His warnings have not stopped the military buildup. They have, however, reached the public domain through what analysts describe as a concerted messaging campaign, a rare instance of the U.S. military surfacing internal concerns before being ordered into action. The Council on Foreign Relations published a direct appeal on February 24, 2026, urging Trump to take the U.S. military's warning seriously, noting that unlike the one-and-done strikes of the past, any new Iran campaign would be potentially much larger and lengthier, and thus much riskier. Let us now step back and look at the full picture. What we are witnessing is a multi-layered geopolitical confrontation that involves not just the U.S. and Iran, but the entire structure of global power. America has the firepower to devastate Iran's military, but it cannot guarantee a short, clean, affordable war. Iran has the strategy to make any conflict painful, prolonged, and politically costly for Washington. Russia has the motivation to arm and support Iran, but not the capacity or will to fight alongside it. China has the economic leverage to sustain Iran, but not the political appetite to sacrifice its own grand strategic interests for Tehran's survival. And Iran, paradoxically, has been strengthened in its resolve by the very strikes meant to weaken it. The steps of war, the troop deployments, the naval exercises, the drone deliveries, the spy ships, the trilateral strategic charters, the joint drills in the Strait of Hormuz, are all being followed. The checklist of pre-conflict actions is being executed. But the actual trigger has not been pulled. And the reason it has not been pulled comes down to one word: calculation. Every party, Trump, Khamenei, Putin, Xi, is calculating whether the benefits of escalation outweigh the costs. And as of today, February 26, 2026, the answer from all four capitals appears to be not yet.